if I have a bad gene, then there's not much I can do about it,
Right.
except just to accept my fate, basically. And nowadays, I think more and more people understand that there's a difference between a gene being like on or switched off.
Yes.
And there are many things that can affect that. Can you talk about that? I think the buzzword is epigenetics.
Right. So that's a very good point. I think that it should be first and foremost stated that there are genetic diseases and that genes do play a role in some diseases, but the straightforwardness of genes playing a role in all diseases exclusively has definitely been challenged. It was challenged before the Human Genome Project for sure, but now especially it has been noticed that there are a few very key reasons for why genes don't tell the whole story. Now you can talk about just how many genes a human has, and then you can talk about how many genes you have in a human body, and you can see that, okay, well, the human genome is like 25,000 genes, but we as functioning humans have something along the lines of 10 billion genes in us, and this is because of our little friends that we have with us called the microbiome of the human body. And dogs share this microbiome as all mammals do. Actually, all vertebrates do. Most multicellular organisms have some form of microbiota. But in any case, what this means is that we actually have been looking at a small subset of the genes that are acting on our body at any given moment. And this is a first fundamental problem with the Human Genome Project. Yes, so I would almost address that before then looking at epigenetics, which is the second, well, not a problem, but it seems that we can have the same set of genes, and two individuals, say identical twins, can have the same set of genes, but depending on their lifestyle factors, will express them differently. And this is sort of at the core of epigenetic programming. And we can talk more about this for sure.
Yeah, so you can say that there's a genotype and then there's the phenotype, the expression,
Yes.
the actual expression.
Right. Yeah, and so you have the genotype, and I like to think of it like if you talk about a mammal's genes, like the human or a dog's genes, and I like to think of it sort of as the scaffolding or the structure, but it's a very dynamic and adaptable scaffolding. So it's sort of like the framework, but then the actual quality of the completed building or whatever that you're making is all filled up with impulses that are coming from the external environment. So you can talk about environmental exposures, and that already is talking about a wealth of information that dwarfs the information that you can get from just looking at the mammal's genes. And this affects, the epigenetic programming as well as the microbiome, which also affects epigenetic programming.
What about genetics from generation to generation? I've read about, like, for example, they talk about the Pottenger's cat study or something like that, where they fed the cats certain way, and then from generation to generation they noticed certain kinds of changes. What do you think about that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Is it called evolution, or is it just random mutations that things go basically bad?
I think that it's a form of adaptation, or of the ability to adapt very quickly to an environment, and that it allows for an organism to adapt to its surroundings and not necessarily have to die just simply because the status quo of its previous surroundings have changed. You see, like if there's a big like, let's say that the food source or the place where animal tended to live previously was destroyed for whatever reason and it has to move, then epigenetic programming can allow for the animal to start adapting to a new lifestyle and habitat, and it can also increase the chances of its offspring of surviving through epigenetic programming, because it can actually, if there's an event that is traumatic enough in an animal's life, this trauma can actually be carried through epigenetic programming to actually program the offspring as well. And this has been shown to be true in humans as well as in some animals, though, or well, all animals, but studies for some animals have only been performed. So yes.
I'm just thinking that like the ultra-processed junk food for animals, it probably hasn't existed for that many generations.
No.
So I'm thinking about if I was like breeding cats or dogs here, and then I kept feeding them only junk food basically from generation to generation, what would happen like to the 10th generation?
Right. Yeah, so there's anecdotal evidence. There was, for example, the classic story of Potts cats that bears a lot of weight with this, where Potts cats was eating a diet of, well, cat food in the wild, which is basically they were just eating small prey that they were catching. And then Potts decided to breed these cats and feed their offspring a kibble diet. And he did this for many generations. It's over 5 generations, but I want to remember that it was 7 generations of cats that were bred over the course of a couple of decades. And what was interesting was that in each consecutive generation, the incidence of chronic disease increased. So to the point where you could see a lot of problems with, well, cancer and then other chronic disease states. And what he did was then he switched the diet of these 7th generation cats back to their original diet. And over 7 generations, the symptoms disappeared.